Thank you for tuning into my channel, Olushola Live. My name is Olushola Taiwo, and I will be continuing my reading of my amazing cousin's book, Our Mother's Sore Expectations. Her name is Kehinde Adeola Ayeni, and I'm excited to read chapter 2 to you today. But before I continue, just a couple of things. I am sitting in my van, looking across the border, Detroit, Michigan. My cousin lives in Michigan and I live in Ontario, Canada. And this is one of my favorite spots at Alexander Park. And so this is what we're doing this evening. But also, I do want to let you know how to get a copy of this book. You can email my cousin directly at kehindeayeni26@gmail.com. Her first name, her last name, the number 26@gmail.com. And finally, before we get started, I'm going to read what is written on the back. Okay, this acknowledgement is written by Dr. Tony Marinho, Obstetrics and Gynecology, Educare Trust, Ibadan, Nigeria. Dr. Tony Marino writes, Our Mother's Sore Expectations tells the painful history of most third world countries, but particularly Black African countries, as they struggle with internal and external forces to survive as nations and citizens. It is a torturous and unnecessary struggle, but an inevitable one. It is aptly thought-provoking, shocking to the sensitive, but self-explanatory as the reader gets absorbed in the often violent events in the book. The narrative takes the reader through every single possible option that faces citizens on a daily basis, from birth to death, tragedy, love, and coup after mind-numbing coup. Every African can see him or herself in the story. For Africans in the diaspora or anyone wanting information, this book is essential literature. It is not about living the dream. It is about how the nightmare developed and how it could easily be so different. For Africans currently in the system, politicians, citizens, presidents, and the military, it is a mirror on their lives and actions. It could become a reference work for needed improvements that will help save the continent and lift it out of the poverty and misery trap. Africa's youth, wherever they are in the world, should read this book and ensure that they do not allow the whole scenario to replay itself in their own lifetime. All right, here we go. Page 16, Chapter 2. The town of Iroko had two claims to fame. It was a very beautiful, picturesque town, almost a peninsula with huge mahogany, ebony, and oak trees around it, as well as lots of rivers, lakes, rolling hills and valleys deep in the rainforest of the southwestern part of the country. It was a community of some 2,000 people. Its second claim to fame was that it had produced most of the intellectuals amongst the Yoruba people. The Yorubas embraced Western education with the arrival of the white man, and by 1955, almost every Yoruba home could boast of having a high school graduate. That was how invested they were in learning the ways of these white people who had come to occupy them. If the rest of Yoruba land could almost boast of having a high school graduate per home, Iroko town could boast of having at least a college graduate from every other home. This was not a small feat, and it was possible due to the tireless and hard work of two people in the town. Principal Edward Buckner from England had come with the other white people during the colonial rule. He arrived in Iroko in 1940 at the age of 20 years, and he became the principal of St. James Grammar School, established by the Anglican missionary. His wife Agnes also worked at the school as the mathematics teacher. Children from Iroko were always considered first for admission, after which students from other neighboring cities and towns were considered. Thus, Iroko town, true to her name, continued to produce intellectuals of high timber and caliber. One of the first graduates from the school in 1945 was Bayo Bankole. He was born in 1927, and he, like his classmates, sailed to England for college education. He went equipped with a scholarship to study medicine, but he did not want to be a doctor. He wanted to be a teacher like Principal Buckner, so he studied education and child psychology. He graduated 4 years later with a degree as elementary school teacher. He felt that being a teacher was a very important job, and being an elementary teacher the most important of all, as children's minds are impressionable, and the kind of teacher a child has can make or break the child for life. So Even though he could have studied the law or medicine like his classmates, he chose to be an elementary school teacher. He returned home in 1949, and his father, though a little disappointed that his son had not become a doctor, was not surprised at his choice of career. He knew that Bayo, a very gentle, kind, and fair person, had a mind of his own and would do that which pleased him and not what society dictated for him to do. Principal Buckner was disappointed as well because he believed that Bayo would have been a great doctor as he had the intellect as well as the compassion. He was, however, pleased that he chose to follow in his footsteps, and he knew that two of them together would work miracles with the children of Iroko. And that was what they did, with Bayo taking care of their primary school education, after which he would pass the children on to Principal Buckner. Within 2 years of returning home, Bayo became the headmaster of the primary school in Iroko, and he was as invested as the principal in educating and cultivating the minds of these young people. Iroko became a town well known for the quality of education that the children received in both primary and high schools. Bayo married his high school sweetheart, Bosse, who had joined him in England a year after he left. She studied nursing and on her return was in charge of the town's dispensary and maternity clinic. They gave birth to 4 sons, including a set of identical twin boys born in 1955. In 1957, they were blessed with the birth of their only daughter and last child. She was an odd-looking baby, and though the Bancoles were loved and well-respected in the town, the most generous and kindest of their citizens could not find a reason to describe the child as beautiful. This was because she had a very crowded and busy face, and as she grew up, a busy body as well. Her eyes were a lot too big for her face, and they looked as if they would burst out of the sockets at any moment. Her lips were too full, and at the time of her birth, she had some pinkish red patches all over her face. She was a very dark-complexioned child, darker than anybody in the family, and with a head full of black, thick, and unruly hair. Later in her life, when she stepped on many toes, which she frequently did, people would describe her as a child that God forgot in the furnace, and that it explained her very dark, burnt, coffee ground complexion and behavior. The people of this town silently accepted this odd-looking child, although many wondered from which part of her family tree she fell. The older members of the community searched their memories, trying to remember whom she could have resembled, as an attempt to find an explanation for the way she looked. But they could not remember anyone. Her family accepted her, and her brother loved and doted on her, all her brothers. They had a princess among them, and she was treated as one. Her father gave her the name Tejumade, which literally means fix your gaze on the crown. But his ambition for her was that she should focus, concentrate, and achieve a crowning glory. Her mother named her Morenikeji. I have a unique person to partner with, because she had become the second female in the house full of men, as their extended families always had boys. Bosse had been the only girl of 8 siblings, while her husband did not have any sister. When Bayo's father saw the baby girl the day she was born, he held her in his arms for a very long time and was lost for words, staring at her as if he was memorizing her features. "Welcome back home, mother," he finally whispered into her ears as he handed her back to her mother. He gave her the name Segi. Tejumade Segi Morenikeji Bankole was thus welcomed into the bosom of this loving family starved of female children. Her name was shortened to Teju, and as a young adult, when her life had taken some turns uncharacteristic for her family, her perplexed father wondered if shortening the name had been the mistake. For Teju means gaze on or focus, without specifying what is to be focused or gazed upon, and perhaps that explaining her seeming lack of goal and direction and her departure from her family's expectations of her. If Teju's busy face when she was a newborn baby, her whole body joined the face as she grew older. She was a restless baby who grew into a restless little girl with tireless energy and was always on the go. Her milestones were all delayed compared to her brothers. She sat at the age of 7 months, turned to stand up at the age of 12 months, and did not walk until she was 15 months old. But on starting to walk, she had a lot of places to go. She had so much energy about her that just watching her was tiring. Baba Bankole, a widower, was the babysitter for his son's children. He discouraged his daughter-in-law from hiring nannies to watch his grandchildren when she returned to her job after each birth, insisting that he could do a better job of taking care of them than a stranger. Baba, as he was addressed, loved to watch his grandchildren, and they never tired him. He was a very busy man in his own way, heavily involved in the welfare and running of their town, a project he took upon himself voluntarily. He was well respected for his fairness and for the fact that he insisted that people do what they were supposed to do at all times, and if they needed help, he would go out of his way to make sure they received the needed assistance. He did not hold any political position in the town, except that he was the king's best friend. So each day, before the children were enrolled in school at the age of 6 years, he would take them with him and walk them out to the palace of Olu Iroko, which was at the center of the town in the marketplace, and there he would remain all day, while his grandchildren ran around the palace, playing with the king's many grandchildren and children. Baba Bankole would spend each day listening to people who had come to complain about one thing or the other in the town to their king, or those who had come to report their neighbors or family members. He, along with Olu Iroko, would settle the disputes, give advice, counsel, reprimand, and punish people whichever way they thought it should be done. From time to time, Baba would go with many of these people to see for himself what the problems were that they were complaining about, going with them to their homes or farms or to the market to conduct his own investigations, which he would then report back to Olu Iroko, because the king could not leave his palace unless it was for a very good reason. He had to be there, available and accessible to his subjects at all times. Whenever Baba had to take these field trips, he would take his grandchildren with him and go listen to these people. And so the children grew up seeing their grandfather perform these important functions for the king and the citizens of Iroko. Baba could not stand wife beaters. He could not tolerate a man who refused to take good care of his family. He detested a woman whose children were not well fed or clean. And on many occasions, such people would be invited to the palace and asked to explain what their problems were, which prevented them from doing the responsible things that they were supposed to do as adults. More often than not, such people always needed help and assistance in one form or the other. Baba would take it upon himself to send for their extended families and demand that they give these people the needed help. Whenever this was not available, the people of the town would be called upon, one after another, to assist the family in trouble. Teju loved to go around town with her grandfather, who would carry her around his neck when she was very small. And when she grew older, he would hold her hand and take her with him on his trips. At other times, Baba visited with Olu Iroko. They would regale one another with stories of when they were young and the history of Iroko. Teju loved to listen to the two of them. Baba, who did not have any daughters of his own, loved Teju, who was his only granddaughter, very much, and he could not get enough of her company. He adored the little girl, constantly telling her she was the most wonderful thing he had ever seen, and that she would achieve greatness. For him, every one of her achievements was a cause for celebration. She never tired him out with her restless energy, and he could not understand it when people complained that Teju was restless. Teju loved her body and showed it off as much as she could. She rolled, wiggled, squirmed, and moved constantly. By her first birthday, the pinkish red patches on her face had disappeared, but the face still looked very odd. She did not speak until she was 2.5 years old, but once she started to talk, she had a lot to say. She joined her adoring brothers in their games, and she would climb trees, play soccer, throw rocks, and swim in the many rivers and lakes around their small town with the best of them. Her brothers were enrolled in school, and they were as brilliant as their father had been. They took to books and loved school very much. They would read to her, and this was the only time they could get her to stay still. Her eager face would have a calm look about it as she listened to one or the other of her brothers read to her. When they discovered that she loved to be read to, the family found some peace in caring for her. And this became the mode of getting her to sleep at night. Or if the caretaker needed a rest from watching her, they would take a book and read to her, and they read everything and anything to her. Her father read the daily newspapers aloud to her, while her brothers, in order to save time when they had to watch her, would read their homework to her as they were doing it. So they read history, geography, literature, science, mathematics, and economics to her. She would listen and she would absorb everything. This formed a significant basis of her education because she could not read on her own. Her oldest brother, Akin, on his way to medical school, would read physics, chemistry, and biology out loud to her. Ayo, her second brother, who had the ambition of becoming a lawyer, would read history, government, and geography to her. Taiwo, the first of the twins in preparation for a life as a writer, read all the great literature, philosophy, and mythology of the world to his sister. He read Shakespeare, Proust, Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and Emerson, Greek mythology and African mythology, amongst others, to her. He read the biography of Gandhi, of Martin Luther King, and the poems and plays of Wole Soyinka to her, while Kehinde, the second twin, was interested in economics, and this he would study while he watched his sister practicing his lessons on her. On this day, a few weeks after Teju's 4th birthday, a 50-year-old man who was in tears came to the house to report her to her parents and grandfather. As the man related the story, he was walking home that afternoon after a hard day's work on his farm, and as he approached his house, 2 doors away from Teju's house, he saw her playing with his children and some of the neighborhood children. He called to his children to come to him and relieve him of the food items that he had with him, food that his family would eat, and Teju came toward him with them. He gave the items in his hands to them, and Kike, his 5-year-old daughter, dropped the bag containing the eggs, breaking all of them. He became very angry with her because she had always been careless, and he had always dropped and broke things. So, to discipline her, he smacked her across her face. Before he could blink, Teju bounced on his back. Wow! While he was bent towards his daughter, and she bit him. It was difficult to shake her or her teeth that had sunk onto his back loose. He started to scream and cry in agony, but Teju clamped her teeth on his back. The people around her had to intervene and pry her from his back. He took off his clothes and showed Teju's family where she had bitten him. On his back was an angry-looking wheal with the teeth mark in the center of it. Kike's father was shaken. Teju's family looked at the man in shock as he related the story. Baba Bankole thanked him for coming to tell them what had happened and that he would investigate and get back to him. Bosse took him to the dispensary to take care of the bite wound for him, while Bayo remained speechless. Baba and Bayo went in search of Teju, and she was still outside on the street playing with the other children. The neighbors who saw her attack the man confirmed his story to her father and grandfather, at the same time advising them that they had to keep a firm grip on her as she was beginning to show signs of being a wayward child. Teju explained to her family that she attacked the man to defend her best friend Kike, who had told her that her father beats them all the time. Bayo was very angry with his daughter, and when they took her back home, he asked her to close her eyes and face the wall as punishment. Baba did not say a word to her, and later in the day, when she was released from the punishment, she went to her grandfather's room to ask him if she did wrong in defending her friend. Her grandfather told her that she did not do wrong and that one should not stand by and watch as other people are abused. Teju was enrolled in school at the age of 6 years old. She did not like school, preferring to be with her grandfather while he made his trips around the town and go to the palace to visit the king, but her father insisted that she had to go to school in the mornings and spend time with her grandfather after school. She was too restless in the classroom, talking all the time, and she found it difficult to settle down to concentrate. The teachers soon learned to make her do all the chores, and they would send her on all the errands all the time. Wow, as this was the only way that other students in the class could have some peace. Her brothers continued to read to her, and they would help her with her homework. She did well in school because whatever the teachers had to teach her, she had already learned it at home with her brothers. In that way, she was always ahead of her class. She was a busybody, and she was well known all over the town. She could get into physical combat with whoever tried to cheat her, and she fought almost every day, coming home with torn school uniforms. Her parents would punish her for this as a deterrent, but Teju always had good reasons for her fights. If you don't put a stop to people trying to exploit you when they first start, it will be difficult later, she would explain to her family. She developed a lot of metaphors for the philosophy of life, and she would quote those as needed. Her favorite one was, "You set the standard of how you want to live your life as a rich person while you are still poor." Teju knew which man hit his wife in town. She knew which father drank up the money meant to take care of the family. She knew which father molested his children and which woman neglected caring for her children. Her boundless energy continued, and by the time she reached adolescence, it gave her a peculiar kind of attraction. She still could not be described as beautiful, even by the most generous of people. But for some reason, men found her irresistible. She always had an excited, anticipatory look about her, and her black coffee-colored skin with puberty took on a glowing velvety texture. She reached a maximum height of 5 feet 4 inches, although she always looked as if she were 6 feet tall because she had a straight, elegant posture with her head held high in self-appreciation. She developed a very beautiful woman's body with wide hips and high, full breasts. She had one of 4 effects on men. Some wanted to appropriate her energy for themselves, some wanted to conquer and subdue her, and others wanted to own her. Her brothers, father, and grandfather, on the other hand, continued to adore her. As characteristic of Baba Bankole, who believed that each and every one of Teju's developmental achievements were an occasion for celebration, upon her becoming a woman marked by the arrival of her first period, he insisted that the ritual to mark this event should be celebrated in no less a place than the palace of Oluiruku. Bayo told his father that the ritual was a family affair and not an event for the whole town. Teju will crown kings, so it is only befitting that we take the rooster to the palace. You, as her father, will still have the honor of being the one to slaughter it after Bosse has made a delicious stew of it. Teju will still have the first pick of whichever part of the rooster she likes, before the rest of us, including the king. She will still come first. So the ceremony will remain the same, but it should be done in the palace with Oluiruku in attendance. I want Teju to know that nobody is more important than her, not even the king," Baba explained to his son. The following day, the family had lunch with the king in his palace, and the ritual was performed. Teju served herself first. She picked 2 pieces of the rooster from the stew, and Baba asked Bayo to welcome his daughter into womanhood. "Teju, you are a woman now," Bayo declared. You were a wonderful little girl who was a constant source of joy to me, and you have become a beautiful young woman. Being a woman is a glorious way to be. You hold the survival of the human race in your womb, and when the time comes, you shall bear many healthy, beautiful grandchildren from me. I am jealous of all the young men who will pursue you, and the many who already want your hand in marriage. So I think I will go to the market to purchase some fierce-looking dogs to guard my doors." Everyone laughed. He nodded at his daughter, who went over to him and hugged him. Like her father predicted, men pursued Teju, and relentlessly too. She had her first sexual encounter at the age of 16 years, and it was with one of her classmates, and she loved it, as her body had always been a source of intense pleasure for her. When the hapless boy, reveling in his victory, passed the news around town that he had scored with her, she let him know that it was for her and not for him. She loved to dance, and she would do so to anything that had a rhythm to it. From real music to ordinary noise, she would dance around town with marching bands on special festivals and with the local bands during the different seasons when one god or the other was celebrated. All through her childhood, her mother was afraid that she might be easily lured away by anyone with music. Teju was very popular in the town, and she made friends with whoever would speak with her, bringing home strays all the time, from animals to human beings, and in spite of her mother's protests, would insist that such people were fed or given whatever help they needed. As teenagers, Teju and her best friend Kike loved to attend parties and would sometimes go to parties that they had not been invited to. The two of them became popular with the boys. Many times she got into trouble with her father, who had forbidden her to go to these parties, especially on school nights. But Teju would sneak out of the house and go all the same. Her father would punish her for the disobedience, and the next time there was a party in town, off she would go. Each time she did a thing that she was not supposed to do, or that she had been warned about, her father would punish her and report her to his father, asking the older man to reinforce the discipline he was trying to impart to his willful child. The elderly Bankole would smile indulgently and tell his son that God only gives a strong child to a strong man. Teju's grandfather would send for her, but instead of punishing or admonishing her as his son wanted, he would tell her about their ancestor, Segi, whom he named her after, and how the woman became a goddess of justice and fairness in the Yoruba pantheon. He told his granddaughter on the many occasions that the ancestor had been a great woman who was fearless and full of integrity, and that every day all the kings of Yoruba land acknowledge her by bowing down to her as they put the Segi pearls around their necks, for their dressing would not be complete without Segi pearls around their necks. He would also tell her that she would achieve glory and crown kings, just like the goddess. He continued to give her the royal blue pearls named after the goddess. Teju's love for her grandfather continued to grow, and she had a lot of those precious royal blue pearls with which she adorned her body. She wore them on her neck as earrings, on her wrists, waists, and ankles. Her brothers grew up and left home one after the other. They followed in their parents' footsteps and went to England to study. Akin studied medicine and returned home in 1975 as a surgeon and started to work at the University College Hospital in Ibadan. That year, 1975, Principal Buckner's wife contracted a disease. It was protracted, and she died and was buried in Iroko. It was a difficult time for the man. His friends, loved ones, and students, both present and past, rallied around him and gave him a lot of needed support. They had loved his wife as well. She had been the mathematics teacher in the school for some 30 years by the time of her death. When she became ill, a lot of them advised her and her husband to return to England so that she could receive the best care possible, but she refused. She knew that cancer would kill her, and she chose to die in Iroko, a place she had grown to love very much. Teju was 18 years old at that time. She had graduated from high school but refused to follow her brothers and pursue higher education in England. She was accepted at the University of Ibadan to study languages. She attended the university for one semester but dropped out, telling her surprised family that there was nothing they had to teach her at the university that she did not already know. The university was more interested in teaching her Latin. She felt that it was a useless language for her to learn. She had an ear for languages and was very fluent in Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa, the principal languages spoken in the country, and she had learned French in high school. She would like to learn other African languages, she explained to her father, and not Latin. Nobody speaks Latin anymore in the world. The university could not help her with other African languages she wanted to learn, and her professors suggested to her that she move to an East African country to live so she could learn Swahili when she expressed interest in the language. This was difficult for Bayo to accept. He was an educator, and the least that he expected from each of his children was a college education. He and his daughter had a lot of discussions about this, in which he tried to appeal to her, but more often than not, these deteriorated into arguments. He eventually gave up and asked her what she planned to do with her life. And she surprised him even more by telling him that she wanted to become a trader. She would like to rent a shop in the market and sell food and clothes to bring in money. Bayo was outraged about this. Excuse me. How can my daughter become a trader, selling things in the market like an uneducated market woman? She is brilliant and should do more with her life. He told her that it was unacceptable to him that she became a trader and that she had to go back to school. Teju dug in her heels and remained at home. However, she approached a successful trader in the market and asked to apprentice with her so she could learn about the business. Frustrated with Teju, Bayo spoke with his own elderly father again. He told him about Teju's latest defiance and the fact that she had always been a source of concern and anxiety to him ever since she was born. Raising her had been difficult for him. She had always done what she wanted to do in spite of warnings and punishments. She had been the only one of his children to sneak out of the house at night to attend parties. She was the only one that always got into fights and would beat people up in the town. Now she was refusing to go to school and get an education. Many men in the town had approached him, asking for her hand in marriage. He knew that they would have been sleeping with her, and they must have loved it. What else would make a man so desperate to want to marry a woman? I am a man, and even though I am her father, I can see her as any man would see her. She has an animal magnetism about her that would make you want to possess her, he lamented to his father. The men had wanted to marry Teju was not the problem for him, but the problem was that most of them were not men he wanted for his daughter. He reported all these to his 83-year-old father, whose only response was what he had always told him each time he reported Teju, and that is, God will only give a strong child to a strong man. Out of exasperation, Bayo finally told Teju she had one of two options, either that she returns to school or she leaves his house. She left the house. Her parents assumed she would go to her brother, the surgeon in Ibadan, since he was the only brother in the country at the time. But she did not. She went to the principal. The recently widowed 55-year-old man was living by himself. Teju, who had grown to love him like an uncle, told him of the new development in her life. The principal was not surprised that she did not want to pursue more education, because he, like most of her teachers, knew that Teju had found it very difficult to sit in a classroom. She was a person who needed to do things with her hand and body all the time. He explored other options with her, like acting, dancing, and even learning a trade that would involve her using her hands, like sewing and carpentry. But Teju was not interested in any of them. She was too restless to settle down to be trained in any of them. She told the principal that she had been evicted from her home and he should take her in, with plans to speak with her father and convince him to work with his daughter as much as possible, since Teju could be very stubborn. They had dinner together and started to talk. He poured his heart out to her, and she listened to all he had to say. He wept for his dead wife and for the regret in his life, which was that they never had children. Teju, who knew the power she had over men, moved over to the crying man and took him in her arms. She comforted and consoled him, took him to his bedroom, stripped off his clothes, and got into bed with him. They had sex. The next morning, the principal was appalled by what he did and was overwrought with guilt and shame. He had abused his role as the adult in the situation. He had taken advantage of the 18-year-old. He had abused his friendship with her father, who was his dearest friend in the world. He said all these to Teju, who explained to him that nobody took advantage of anyone, and definitely not him taking advantage of her. If that were the case, then she took advantage of him, and that all she wanted to do was comfort him. He explained to her that he was like a father to her, and that if words of what happened ever got out, he would lose the respect he had spent almost 40 years of his life building. He was considered a father to all the children in the town, and he had abused the position. He was inconsolable. Teju explained to him that people need not know, and that she would always love and respect him. She left the disrupt principal and went to her surgeon brother in Ibadan, where she remained for a week until her father came for her and asked her to return home. He told her that she could start as an apprentice to the wealthy trader as she wanted. A few weeks later, Teju discovered she was pregnant. For the first time in her life, she was terrified and she did not know what to do. She agonized over her options for another 2 months. An abortion was not an option for her because she believed that it was killing a life. But she felt that she could not carry a child for the principal either. She remembered the morning after she had sex with him and how unhappy he had been and all his self-blame. She realized that she was in a very difficult position. She entertained the idea of running away from home, but she was not a runner either. She had done many things in her life, she acknowledged to herself, most of them considered shameful by her fellow townspeople, but she had always stayed and faced the consequences. She had been blamed for some broken marriages, but she was not a woman to hide her face in shame. She had always stood straight and endured whatever she had to endure. Her family would be disappointed in her, she knew, but what else could she do? She could not lie about the father of the baby either. Finally, when she was 3 months pregnant, she calmly got up one Monday morning and knocked on her parents' door. She was invited in, and she announced to them that she had something to tell them. She recounted the events of the day she slept with the principal in details and told them the story in such a way that she took responsibility for having had sex with him. She told them that she knew he was vulnerable at the time, but that she slept with him because she wanted to give him a child. Bayo was flabbergasted and he lost total control of himself. He started to yell at his daughter and to accuse her of lying against the principal, that he had known the man for almost 40 years and he trusted him. He is a man of outstanding integrity, and he would never sleep with my daughter. He called Teju a whore, and he cursed the day she had been conceived. He told her that she had brought nothing but shame and heartache to him all his life, and that he could forgive all but the ultimate betrayal of her getting herself pregnant out of wedlock and lying against his dear friend. He could not forgive. Teju, equally angry, yelled back at her father that she might be a lot of things, but not a liar. She was not. I have never lied in my life, but why will I start now? Yes, the principal is a good man, and he is a lot of things you are saying he is, but he is first and foremost a man, and he slept with me. At this point, Bayo stopped and stared at her for a moment. He left the house, went into the shrub behind his house, cut a cane, returned to his house, and started to whip her. His wife was surprised at him because he had never whipped anyone before. Bossa intervened and tried to stop him from beating their daughter, at the same time appealing to him to calm down. She told him that whipping Teju would not solve anything, especially since she was pregnant. It will only complicate things more in her condition. If she is pregnant, she continued, she will have the child and the family will take care of the child. Bosse asked her daughter if she was sure that the principal was the father of the baby. And when Teju told her mother that she was sure, she asked if the principal knew that she was expecting his child. Teju told her mother that she had not told him. Bosse continued to appeal to her enraged husband to calm down and that they would need to form a plan of action to deal with the situation. Bayo was inconsolable. He continued to accuse his daughter of lying against his best friend, and Bosse, finally frustrated with him, too, told him that she believed her daughter because Teju was not a liar. Bosse knew that Teju would not lie, and even in situations that she could have gotten out of trouble easily by lying, Teju had always told the truth and endured her punishments. She understood her daughter very well. Teju was free-spirited and would sleep with men if she found them attractive and would not think a thing of it. Teju's body had always been a source of pleasure for her ever since she was born. What Bosse had resignedly done when she became sexually active was to teach her about protecting herself and had even supplied her with condoms. Teju is not a child to be subdued, Bosse had known for a long time. The only thing you can do with Teju to protect your sanity is work with her. Bosse also knew, as a woman would know, that Teju seduced the vulnerable principal and chose to have his child. Why else wouldn't she use condoms? She rationalized that the principal was a good man, a true friend to her husband, and a man that she knew loved her daughter, and it was difficult for a lot of people to like Teju. Perhaps the thing to do is to encourage her to marry the principal, she concluded. Bayo continued to rage at his daughter. He continued to curse her and say that he regretted that she was ever his child. "I disown you right this minute," he announced. "I want you to leave this house immediately." Teju left in spite of her mother's attempts to prevent her from leaving and to calm her father. She traveled to the city offices in Mokbo Hall in Ibadan, where she requested to have her name changed. She dropped her father's name. "If he wants to disown me, all well and good," she told herself. "I will disown him as well." So she changed her last name to Morenikeji, which was her third name. She became Tejumade Segi Morenikeji. "I am not bearing any man's name ever again," she vowed to herself. After doing this, she went to Akin at his job and told him that she was pregnant for the principal. He was very upset and angry with her as well. He told her that she had surely ruined her life. "Why would you do such a thing?" he demanded from her. Teju told him that she would need his support and wanted to know if he would help her or, like their father, turn his back on her. Akin told her that he could never turn his back on her but suggested that she get an abortion. Teju refused. She remained with her brother for another 2 months until her father came for her. He had spent the time thinking about the whole situation. He had gone back to his father, told him everything, especially that he found it difficult to believe that the principal would get his daughter pregnant. His father's response was, "God will only give a strong child to a strong man." He advised his son to ask the principal, and if he said that the child is his, he should ask him what he planned to do. He reminded Bayo that the principal was a good man, but a man he was. He had been a saint all his life, but he had slipped once. And he slipped because he was human. He encouraged his son to remember the good times he had had with the principal and remember the good the man had done. He made a mistake like we all do, and that is what human beings do. He also told him that disowning his daughter would not solve anything, and that Teju is a challenging child to raise, but a bad child she is not. God knew that you were up to the task, and that is why he gave Teju to you. She will settle down and find her niche in life, and she will do great things. She wasn't given all this energy and spirit for nothing. She will use it to achieve glory, just like her name. Taking his father's advice, Bayo approached the principal and told him that Teju was about 5 months pregnant and that she said that the baby was his. The principal broke down and started to cry. He told his friend that it was true and begged Bayo for forgiveness. He told him that he did lose his mind at that time and he slept with Teju and had not known what came over him. He offered to marry her, saying that he always loved Teju and he would be a good husband to her and cherish her. Bayo surprised himself by bursting into tears as well. He went over to the principal and hugged him. All is forgiven, he told his friend. He felt betrayed by him, but he would draw on all the years of love and devotion that they had for one another to help him through. The principal wanted to know why he waited so long before coming to him with the news. He had dined with his wife and him several times. Why hadn't they spoken about it with him? Bayo told him that he thought his daughter had lied, and the principal said Teju does not lie. So with all these developments, Bayo went to Ibadan and appealed to his daughter to come home. He apologized for his behavior and told her that the principal was willing to marry her and that they would give her baby a name and make an honest woman of her. Teju refused to marry the principal. She told her father that she was an honest woman and had always been. She did not need a man to give her integrity. She loved the principal and was sure he loved her too, but that they did not love one another in that way. Being pregnant was not enough reason for marriage. She returned home with her parent, and the principal proposed to her, and she refused to marry him. The principal was full of remorse about impregnating Teju. He offered his resignation to the directors of the school board. He had brought shame on himself, he continued to say. How can parents continue to trust me with their children? The board did not want him to resign. They took the matter seriously, however, and they had several meetings that involved several of the school's alumni. The people of the town were involved as well. The board concluded that what the principal did was serious indeed, but inasmuch as Teju was not a child at the time, she was not a current student of the school, he had not abused his position as principal. They had a lot of respect for him, and they did not want to lose him and the good work he had continued to do for the school and for Iroko. And besides, Iroko was his home. He had been there most of his adult life. What would he do if he returned to England? Several members of the board said amongst themselves that they could empathize with his powerlessness at being seduced by the wild girl Teju. And so convinced, the principal stayed. He was grateful for the people's support and continuing trust in him. He vowed to continue to serve them well. He promised Bayo and his family that he would be in the child's life when it arrived and meet his obligation. And if Teju changed her mind, he would still love to marry her. Teju gave birth to a baby girl in 1976 and named her Iretiogo. The principal gave her his late wife's name, Agnes. The baby had all of her mother's features, but they were softer on her. Teju refused to give the baby girl the principal's last name, and on her birth certificate, it was Iretiogo Agnes Morenikeji. Bayo was not surprised at this. He asked his daughter why the baby's name was not Iretiogo Agnes Buckner, or at least Iretiogo Agnes Bankole. I dropped your name 6 months ago, and I vowed to myself that I would not bear another man's name ever again. And since Ireti is my child, she will have my name, Teju told her father. This was a slap on the face for Bayo. He stared at his daughter and wondered what kind of mind she had. He asked her why she had dropped his name and told him that it was because of all the events of the day. She told him that when she told him she was pregnant, the way he beat her, his cursing at her and disowning her. I have never been so humiliated in my life, and I will not stand for anyone to humiliate me like this again, ever. I don't have answers to your name. I don't have to answer to your name. I have 3 of my own, and they are enough for me and my children. Thank you very much. Bayo continued to stare at his daughter and was lost for words. He remembered what his wife had always told him. You can only work with Teju. You cannot work against her. If you try to work against her, you will lose her and you will suffer a lot of heartache. He realized that his wife had been right. He went to his father again to tell him that Teju dropped the family name, but all the old man told his son was the same thing he always told him each time he complained about his daughter. God will only give a strong child to a strong man. Bayo did not know what to make of his daughter's latest actions. I have never been able to understand her, he thought. She is like a stubborn mule, and I continue to wonder, as I had many times, where she came from. I don't think I'm strong enough to be her father. I think God made a mistake in this situation. I am not up to the task. I have never been, he told his father in resignation. There was a long pause. His father asked him to make himself very comfortable because he had a story to tell him. Why do you think I gave her the name Segi when she was born? Baba Bankole asked Bayo. Bayo was quiet for a while. I don't know. I know that Segi is one of the goddesses of our pantheon. I know that she was a brave woman who wouldn't tolerate other people being treated unfairly, and as a result of that, she became the conscience of kings, symbolized by her blue pearls that kings had to wear around their necks all the time. When Tejumade Segi Morenikeji Bankole was born, and I set my eyes on her, I thanked God for sending her back to us. Baba started to tell his son, and Bayo gave him a strange look, wondering what he was talking about. I knew my great-grandmother. She died when I was 10 years old, the older man continued. She had always been blind all my life, and she would sit in her room all day long, and people would visit her. I loved to go to her room and visit with her. She would invite me to eat with her, and she would give me meat or fish or chicken or whatever it was that she was having. And she always had stories to tell me. The day that I turned 10 years old, I went to visit her as usual, and I told her that it was my birthday. She was very happy and asked me to sit down, and that she had something very special to give me. I sat down, and the special thing she had for me was another story. But on that day, she told me that even though she had told me hundreds of stories before, this was the best of them, and that I should always remember this story because it would help me in my life. I am going to tell you the story now because you are going to need it too. I should have told you when Teju was born, but I don't know why I didn't. My great-grandmother told me on the day the story of how our family came to make Iroko our home. Almost 300 years ago, there lived a woman who was my great-grandmother's great-great-grandmother. And when she had to leave our home in Oyoile, in exile, she came to Iroko to make her home. Her name was Segi. Segi had huge eyes. They were too big for her face, and she had very full lips, fuller than anyone in our family or town. Her skin was as dark as midnight, and she had too much energy about her. She grew into a very strong and determined woman, married and had children. She could not tolerate any unfairness or anyone being abused, and she would go to war on behalf of the downtrodden and the underdog. She saw everything going on in the town with her eyes that were too big and criticized all wrong with her lips that were too full. She always wore those precious royal blue beads around her neck and on her wrists and on her hips. And these pearls were beautiful against her very dark skin, and her skin would glow against the precious pearls. She would not bow to the king of Oyoile, and she would not kneel down to anyone in obeisance. Her reasons were that they were mere mortals like her. She would give them their due respect as human beings, but she would not worship another person. Oyoile had a very powerful king at the time, but he was not kind or wise as far as Segi was concerned, because he could not think for himself. He just followed the footsteps of those before him, and blindly too. Segi would free his slaves and help them escape, and her reason was that God did not make it such that one person should own another person. Oyoile at the time also had a very powerful army, which would go around Yoruba land to other kingdoms and wage wars against people. When they would win these wars, which was often, they would enslave the people. At other times, they would not enslave the people that they had waged wars against, but these people would be under their dominion. The king would send an emissary to rule over them, and they had to pay tribute to Oyoile on a regular basis in the forms of slaves, agricultural products, money, horses, and a lot of precious resources. The people of Oyoile loved this, as they did not have to work as hard as other people. They had people working in their different towns and villages to support them and their lifestyle. Segi had a big problem with this and continued to criticize the king and his townspeople. Everybody hated her for criticizing them. It so happened that about 5 years after this king ascended the throne of his forefathers, reports were heard in the kingdom of a creature that came and made its home on the outskirts of Oyoile. Segi never saw this creature with her eyes, but a lot of people claimed that they saw it and that the gods had helped them escape when it attempted to eat them. People described it as a creature with 2 feet like human being, but without a skin. Some said it had a head of a lion, while others said it had a head of a gorilla. It bellowed smoke from its mouth, and its food were the young adults of the kingdom. These young people were disappearing in large numbers, and everyone was gripped with fear. The people appealed to the king to do something about the creature that was taking their children in the prime of their lives, and he did try to do something about it. He sent his very powerful generals and his brave soldiers and hunters to hunt and kill this creature. They could not. All of them disappeared as well. Terror gripped the land. Segi did not believe that there was a special creature anywhere taking their children. She told the people who cared to listen to her that the only monster they had to fear was the king. He was the one and only monster taking their children from them, and that the gods turned the king into a monster to punish the citizens for not putting a stop to his excesses. Rather, most of them had gone along with him. He commanded wickedness and unfairness, and the people obeyed him. They didn't have to obey him because he was just one man, only one man, but they obeyed him because of the wickedness in their hearts as well. As characteristic of her, she went to the palace and told the king, "You are the monster created by your hubris, and the gods who frown on such things are punishing us with the demands of human sacrifice. If you truly want to kill this monster that is a part of you, you have to change your ways. You have to stop being a dictator and an empire builder. Invite everyone on this land to work with you in cooperation, and you work with us in cooperation as well. And this monster will go away, because then you'll have created a democratic land." The king was enraged that she dared call him the monster that was half man, half lion, half gorilla, with no skin, bellowing smoke with its mouth and eating the children as people had reported it to be. He told her that she was insane, a belief shared by a lot of the people in the kingdom at the time. "Can you not see that the kingdom has powerful enemies without? There are the people who speak other tongues and who constantly wage war against us, like the tribe of the Hausa and the Tapa, and then this monster too." Segi explained to him that truly there were enemies without, but the true enemy to conquer was the enemy within, and the enemy within the kingdom was the monster sitting on the throne in the guise of the king. If we are able to conquer this enemy within, the enemy who speaks other tongues will be nothing for us to worry about. Segi could not understand why her king and people would fight other Yoruba people who spoke the same tongue as them and were like brothers and sisters to them. She believed that there should be cooperation among the Yoruba people as a whole and not enmity and wars. She felt that Oyoile should stop enslaving and colonizing people. Rather, they should form trade agreements with them, and in that way condition would benefit the Yoruba group as a whole. And they would be in a better position to fight enemies that spoke other tongues and were invading other parts of Yoruba land from time to time. She was of the opinion that the king of Oyoile did not need to colonize people to be a mighty king, but that he could be a mighty king by working with other Yoruba people. But the situation remained as they were because the king did not listen to her. And the creature continued to take their children. One day, about 3 years after the creature that was half man and half lion, half gorilla, without skin, bellowing smoke from its mouth, started to eat the young adults of Oyoile and the surrounding Yoruba kingdoms, a strange-looking man came to the palace of the king in Oyoile. He was accompanied by a lot of people who looked like our people, but they were his slaves. When he walked into the town, everyone took to their heels and ran for their dear life, because some of the people who had seen the creature that had been eating the young people identified the strange-looking man with the slaves as the creature. He was like a man. He did have skin, but it was of a different color. He had a head like a man, but with long hair like a lion's mane, and long beard and hair around his face like a gorilla's. He was a white man, and he came to the kingdom to form an agreement with him to trade in slaves. His slaves, who were people like us, but who spoke other tongues, carried gifts, which this white man brought for the king. When Segi heard that the creature had come to town with a lot of slaves, and people were running away from him and looking for their children, she went to the palace to see for herself. And she saw that it was a man, like the men in the town, but he did not have the color of his skin. The white man met with the king in private. Segi tried to get into the king's chamber to hear what was being discussed, but the white man's slaves would not let her. At the end of the meeting between the king and the white man, the latter departed after the king had given him 100 of his own slaves. Segi was enraged. The king explained to the town that the white man said that if he would supply him with 100 slaves every month, he would stop stealing the people whom he had been stealing on the outskirts of the town. The king promised the white man that he would supply him with 100 slaves every month. The white man in turn would supply the king with guns and other weapons to wage wars, so that his army would be the most powerful in the land. He also gave the king a mirror and gold. He told his people that as they could see, he was not the monster eating their children, as a crazy woman Segi would have them believe. Rather, with his agreement with the white man, that they had all mistaken him to be a creature that was half man, half lion or gorilla, bellowing smoke from his mouth. The people of Oyo-Ile had nothing to fear. What they had to do was work harder with him in building a very powerful army to wage wars on other Yoruba people. Then they would be in a position to obtain the slaves to supply to the white men. Their children would be safe, and Oyo-Ile would finally know peace. Segi told the king that what he should do was to take his very powerful army and ammunition, go after the white man and kill him and others like him immediately. She asked the king to look at himself in the mirror that the white man gave him, that he would see that the other Yoruba people who looked like him were not the enemy, but the white man was. She appealed to the people of the town to stop the king. She reminded them that the 100 slaves each month would be children of people like them, Yoruba people like them. If they sold other people's children into slavery, they were selling themselves into slavery. They did not listen to her. 4 years after the king started to supply the white man with 100 slaves a month, people whom he was capturing from other Yoruba land, 2 of the generals in the army of Oyo-Ile went to war on his instructions, conquering the people whom they fought against, but did not deliver the bounty of the war to the king. They kept for themselves and attempted to set up their own kingdom. The king did not like this, of course, so he sent a troop of his army to go and fight these 2 generals and kill them. But in those days, before a king could declare war on an enemy, he had to inform his people and obtain their consent. At the town meeting to obtain his citizens' consent, Segi told him that he had no right to do that. She explained to him that the generals did exactly what he had been doing for years. If he felt that they had the right to wage wars on people, conquer them, and enslave them, or live off their sweat, then his generals had the right to do the same, because they were human just like him. So if he decided to have them killed, he deserved to be killed as well. The king did not listen to her, and the very few people in the town who thought like her. He sent an army against the 2 generals. The army did not succeed. Very soon, many of the other generals started to do the same thing too, not delivering bounty of the war to the king. The king was gradually losing his grip on the kingdom. There were a lot of guerrillas arising and doing exactly the same thing that the king had been doing, harassing people, enslaving them, and selling them to slave traders. Many of them were selling these people to white people who were taking them across the oceans to other places. Yoruba land was gripped in terror. people of Oyoile, who had for the most part always enjoyed peace as their army had always protected them from these wars, did not like the turn of events because their children were being captured again. They cried out to their king to save them from the situation, and the king did arise up to the occasion. He convened his army that was still the most powerful unified army and started to wage wars against these guerrilla armies. Many of his ex-generals were captured during these wars and imprisoned. After 10 of them had been captured, the king decided that he would have them executed publicly to teach other people an important lesson that they should not entertain such ideas, as punishment for such acts would be public execution and humiliation for them and their families. Segi was against this as well. She did not think that these generals should be executed. She felt that even if they had done wrong in harassing their fellow men, killing them and enslaving them, or selling them to slave traders, but if they deserved to die, then the king should be the first person to be killed, because the generals who defected had the same ambition as the king. They did exactly as he did, so why should they be killed and the king's life be spared? She also told the people of the town that if they were going to have the generals killed, then everyone in the town deserved to die as well, because each and every citizen of the town had participated in the waging of wars against other people with weaker armies, had enslaved other people, and had had an easier life from the fact that they had been living off the wealth that came from the colonized lands. So the generals who defected were not any guiltier than any other citizen of Oyoile, and that the king was the guiltiest of all, because as leader, he had set the example that the people followed. Again, she advised the king to stop waging wars against people and engaging in slave trade, and to make it illegal for people to participate in slavery. She told him that his powerful army should work with the other armies of other Yoruba land for unified protection of Yoruba people against enemies with different tongues, and that the Yoruba people should not relate by division, but by cooperation. After all, they were all from the same source, as Oduduwa was the father of all Yoruba people. The king did not listen to her and proceeded with his plan of public execution of these people. He also continued to use his powerful army to fight other Yoruba kingdoms and to enslave other Yoruba people, whom he continued to sell to the white people who were buying slaves to take across the oceans. Any guerrilla army that he captured that was doing the same thing that he was doing, he would have them killed. Segi could not tolerate this, and she continued to tirelessly campaign publicly against the king. She explained to the people that the king might appear to be the most powerful man in Yoruba land at that time, but that since he was mortal, he would die, and others would rise up and do the same. He was setting up a precedent, abusing his power, and starting a thing that could become like a religion. She told them that this is the process by which a group of people bring a curse upon their heads, because for generations to come, Yoruba people would continue to sell their children into slavery. She told the people that they were equally guilty, and not only for their participation, but for not stopping the king. Nobody listened to her, but she continued to shout all these messages out to them all the same. She continued to appeal to other kings of other parts of Yoruba land not to fight each other as they were brothers and sisters speaking the same language, but to unite, to fight other enemies that came against them, to wage war against them, and even the white man who had been coming to buy their children, whom they were selling into slavery. She impressed it upon them that if you sold a person who looked like you and spoke like you into slavery, you were selling yourself into slavery. You are killing a part of yourself. That is what is called self-hatred. She started to free the slaves that she could free, and she would have nothing to do with her neighbors who continued to participate in slavery. At this time that the people and the king appeared not to listen to her, everybody was afraid of her and her tongue, that the truth and criticized any wrongdoers. She was a thorn in the flesh of the king because she would not keep quiet. He wanted her dead, He eventually accused her of a number of things, amongst which was witchcraft, and the penalty of this was death. The day that he pronounced the death sentence on her in a town meeting, she stood up and told him that he could not kill her because she had not done anything to warrant death, and that nobody dared touch her. She left the palace and the perplexed king and went to her house. The king became more afraid of her and asked his soldiers to capture her and bring her back to him, that he would personally behead her. They went to her house and asked her to come with them. They were afraid to touch her. She told them that she was not going anywhere. If the king wanted to see or speak with her, he would have to come to her house. She was not wasting any more of her time with his foolishness. She was a busy woman who had to take care of her family. The soldiers went back to the king and told him that they could not capture her. Everybody in Oyo-Ile believed that she had very powerful magic and that it explained her power. The king sent for all his medicine men and magicians to capture her and kill her. They went to her house and tried many things, and none of them worked. They shot arrows at her, and the arrows bounced off her body. They tried to behead her with machetes, but the men who tried this became paralyzed. They chanted incantations at her, but she did not die. Finally, they gave up and returned to the palace. The king sent for many more powerful medicine men from other towns, and they came with their magic to kill this woman. They tried for days but did not succeed. Finally, the king sent for the most powerful magician in all of Yoruba land. He tried to kill her but failed as well. He gave up and told the king that the woman would not die. She was just too powerful, and that the only thing the king could do was to agree to wear her around his neck all the time. That was the only magic that he had that would subdue her. The king asked the medicine man how he would wear her around his neck when he just told him that he wanted her dead. The medicine man explained to the king that the best he could do to get rid of Segi was to turn her into precious pearls, the most precious in the world, and the king, as well as all the kings of Yoruba land, would always have to wear her around their necks forever and ever. The dressing of a king would not be complete without Segi pearls around his neck, and any Yoruba ruler without the pearls around his neck would not be worthy of calling himself a king. The desperate king agreed, and my great-grandmother's great-great-grandmother was turned into her royal blue pearls, and they were named Segi. And that is why those pearls are called the mother of all pearls. Of course, she did not turn into pearls, but the powerless medicine man had to help the king save face on that fateful day. It was unheard of for a subject to be more powerful than a king and all the medicine men in the land. It was a compromise that the medicine man arrived at with Segi. She agreed that if the king would always wear her pearls around his neck as a reminder to him that she was his conscience, she would leave town and never be seen again. She upheld her end of the bargain and left town with her children. The people of the town were told that she had turned into pearls and that she had loved so much. That is the origin of the tradition that all the kings of Yoruba land must wear Segi pearls around their neck every day. The dressing of a king would not be complete without Segi pearls around his neck, for Segi is the conscience of the king. And the praise song for Segi is: Segi with 200 clothes, Segi the mother of all pearls, Segi with beautiful eyes, Segi with skin like velvet, Segi whose beauty is unsurpassable, Segi is a brave heroine, Segi the conscience of kings. Baba Bankole concluded, "This is the story my great-grandmother told me on my 10th birthday. This was her special gift to me. When Teju was born, that was my reason for giving her the name Segi. because we consult the family history before we name a child. Segi is a goddess in our pantheon, as you said, but she was a very real woman, and she was our ancestor who became deified for her courage and strength. Biko si eniyan, ìmọ́lẹ̀ kò sí. Without man, there will be no gods. Many people in this town over the years had wondered where Teju came from because of her looks and her behavior. She came from us. She is my great-grandmother's great-great-grandmother, and she has come back home to us. God gave her to us because he knew that you were up to the task. He didn't give her to me or to one of your brothers. She is to be worn around the neck of kings, and it is an honor to you that you are her father. She will bear her name. She will crown kings. The end of chapter 2. I know it was long, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in. Chapter 3 will follow in another video. Bye for now.